Hello and welcome again to another episode of Vintage Pens for the Modern User. In this episode, we're going to explore Waterman's Ink-vue fountain pens. It's a unique fountain pen. It's not often found and it's overlooked, but they have fantastic nibs, beautiful celluloid, and kind of a fascinating filling mechanism that, although it sounds complicated, is really quite basic. In the 1930s, when Waterman developed this, Parker had developed the vacuumatic, and Schaefer had developed its plunger filling mechanism in their vacuum fill pens. The big thing with these pens was to fill the barrel with ink, thus allowing a larger supply of ink, as well as using celluloid materials that allowed users to view the ink level. So there was some competition between some of the big five US makers. Conklin also developed the Nozak fountain pen of the 30s as well. So all of those pens were designed with the user in mind. These pens were meant to be used every day, of course, and manufacturers were well aware of that and often competing to give their customers the best writing instruments possible. So let's dive in and take a close look at what makes the Waterman's Ink-vue unique and fun to use.
All right, so here we have a closer look at the Waterman's Ink-vue fountain pens. These fountain pens began production at the end of 1934 and used this beautiful celluloid plastic. There were 4 different colors. You can see black, you can see this red burgundy color, there's a green, and there's also this silver gray color. All the pens had all the pens had a barrel that was transparent, kind of a crisscross pattern. It's difficult to see in the black, and it's difficult to see depending on the clarity as the celluloid changes. But here in the barrel section of the pen, the barrel portion of the pen, this material alternates between the green color and then the clear colored celluloid or the transparent celluloid. All these pens had that, and that allowed, again, the users to see how much ink. Ink was in direct contact with the barrel of these pens, and so you could hold it up to a light source, or of course, when the clarity was really good and you're using a blue or a black ink, you could easily see how much ink is left as I'm writing with this pen and know when you needed to refill it. So higher volume of ink was a selling feature, as well as knowing when you were going to run out. In addition to the 4 colors that Waterman made, they also made 2 different trims. You can see those examples here. I have a matching pen and pencil set here in this more deluxe type trim, where you can see 3 cap bands on the pen. And the clip has a nice sort of knurled is probably not the right word, but textured part around the clip here, but otherwise it's a very plain, very straightforward. Again, this is a little bit deco, right, in 1935 design here on the clip. And then you can see here on the black one that we just have a different, actually, I think even more deco, even more elegant clip on this pen. But then the cap band is rather straightforward and plain. I kind of wish they had used this clip on the higher model of pen, because I think it's really got some unique deco design to it. They were all marked here very clearly: Waterman fountain pen, made in the United States, made in New York. They have a sort of a stepped top, and then on the lower model pens, they actually had a nice emblem. Waterman's emblem, globe emblem, was on the bottom, whereas the deluxe model pens actually, instead of being black, the celluloid matched at the top and celluloid matched at the bottom with that step design. Again, I think very elegant, very deco kind of fountain pens. Now the nibs on these pens were often found with Waterman's well-known keyhole nibs that they began using in the number 5 and the number 7 series in their hard rubber fountain pens with the color-coded nibs. They use these keyhole breather holes, and in fact you can find these pens. Let me see if one of them has it here. Yes. With the color coding is on the nib. So this nib, although it may be hard to see depending on the lighting, is actually marked red. So Same type of red nib that you would find in the Waterman 7 and the Waterman's 5, which was a medium flexible nib. So that's a neat thing. I think those keyhole nibs are very elegant, and being able to find some of that history. This one actually is a brown nib, which is a quite rare, uncommon nib to find in one of these fountain pens. And sometimes they're not marked, but oftentimes you will find these nibs. Here's another red in this one. Oftentimes these nibs are quite a delight to use and quite flexible. So before I dive into writing with one of these, let me just show you why this is sort of a Rube Goldberg pen. It's really a button filling mechanism. So you see here on the back this lever filler, which is sort of reversed and it has a hinge in it. It looks kind of a little bit odd for what you might think of if you're used to normal lever fillers. Okay, but this seam here, you see this is my transparent part of the barrel. There's a seam here, and actually what is happening underneath the lever, if we were to remove this, we find ourselves with basically what is an essential bulb filling fountain pen. Okay, so we have this large sac on the back. There's a breather tube inside, and you would compress the sac multiple times, filling the pen with ink by the vacuum created by the sac, drawing ink in the breather tube, and filling the pen. Bulb fillers had been around for quite some time in the celluloid era, and so this essentially is a bulb filler. However, they covered the bulb filler with a lever mechanism. So instead of having to remove any part of the pin or unscrew any part of the pin, here we have essentially a lever mechanism that is going to be lifted up at the 90 degree, and then it will compress back and forth using a lever bar inside to do the same action I was doing with my hand, squeezing that sac multiple times and filling the pen with ink. What a unique idea. Basic simplicity kind of engineered into something more complex. But again, there was less that the user had to do to fill the pen. You didn't actually have to unscrew the back of the pen cap in order to write with it. You could work it if you were familiar with Waterman's lever fillers, if you were a Waterman's loyal person, you could just pretty much use this almost like a lever filler. Again, the mechanism slightly different because instead of pulling the lever and pushing it back, you pull it 90 degrees and then you continue to use it and work it back and forth. So let's fill this pen. This is a well-used, well-loved pen. You can see the celluloid is sort of discolored here over time with age. That can happen, but that makes this a good user pen. And here we are designing this program around using our vintage pens. And the trim's a little bit worn. So all those things, when you encounter pens like this, they really don't detract from the beauty, and they certainly don't detract from the usability. So we'll put it in our inkwell. I'm going to tilt my Waterman's ink slightly here, and I'm just going to work this lever. Again, I'm pumping it multiple times. And what's happening inside is the sac is being squeezed and creating a vacuum with that bulb filling mechanism. And eventually, you will find that you won't express any more air bubbles as you do that. And you'll know then that you've filled it with ink. So probably 10 compressions maybe, give or take. Bubbles that no longer exist as you do it. That's how you know instead of expressing air, you're expressing ink, and therefore you've filled your pen. So very lovely writing pens. They do post. That's a quite lengthy, quite comfortable. I have relatively large hands, and I could say that I would have no problems using this. Okay, so here we have our keyhole nib. I'm an overwriter. I always talk about being an overwriter with these videos. If you let the pen do the work, you have no problems. Because again, it writes under its own weight. So this is Waterman's. Sorry about the shaking of the camera here. I'm going to adjust that. This is Waterman's, what was known as the Ink-vue. From 1934. I'm not sure how long the duration, but we'll say through the end of the 30s likely this existed. Keyhole nib. I'm not sure how flexible this nib is, but let's find out. Yeah, it certainly has some flexibility, not uncommon with Waterman's nibs. So I can get some nice broad strokes there and some nice hairline thin strokes there. So always a delight to use Waterman nibs with flex, especially if you're someone who's practiced that style of writing. I think you would find one of these pens to be unique. Do find one that's restored. Although it is a Rube Goldberg bulb filling mechanism, it does require some special skill to restore one of these pens. However, once it's restored, it is easy to use and it is an excellent writing vintage pen. So I would encourage you to check out the Waterman's Ink-vue, and it may be your next vintage pen that you decide to use every day. Happy writing.